Hello everyone, my name is Mark. As I was following this story on Kirk Cameron, I came to a link for Ray Comfort where he was in a debate with Thunderfoot. And then I clicked on this video response by Tooltime, which was in response to this debate. And as I listened to Tooltime, there was a couple of statements that he made that I felt compelled to answer. One in particular. There's not a lot of points to really answer, just this one that really kind of grabs me. To begin with, Tooltime was stating that he felt that Ray Comfort shouldn't use the term knowledge or to know with any degree of confidence because he couldn't prove it scientifically. And the error, though, is that Tooltime is trying to well, he's not trying to, but I think he mistakes the debate as a scientific one instead of one that is largely philosophical. I mean, he even acknowledges that he understands that it's a philosophical argument because he states that anyone with Philosophy 101 would know that you couldn't blah, blah, blah. So, so I think it's fair to say that he knew that it was a philosophical argument, but it's simply not true to say that you can't use terms like to know without any empirical evidence of a type that's most suitable to scientific pursuits. So, you know, whether atheists know it or not, they habitually confuse and conflate the rigors of science to the debates of a philosophical argument. And it's a real common mistake that atheists tend to make because they tend to reflect an existentialist point of view. So, for example, if I say, I know that God exists, I can say this with confidence from the evidence which satisfies my own conscience. Now, I know that Tooltime or Thunderfoot may not accept that evidence as satisfactory, but it doesn't need to satisfy their philosophical point of view, but only the believers. And I mean, obviously, we want Tooltime. I say we collectively, as those on my side of the argument, we want Thunderfoot, we want Tooltime to accept our argument, but it doesn't necessarily, mean that they will accept it. But the fact is that I have evidence that convinces me and my conscience that this argument is true. Now, I think that that's really what it comes down to is that if you're coming to the debate, if you're coming to an argument, you have to be honest with yourself and understand that um, really there is no physical evidence for the creation of the universe or for its origins. No matter which side of the argument you're on, neither the atheist nor the believer can bring to bear any physical evidence to establish that their theory of how everything came to be is the true theory. Now, notice that I said any physical evidence. There's other evidences which can be brought to bear, specifically the kinds of evidences that Ray Comfort was using, such as, the complexity of DNA or the order of the universe. There are evidences which are um, constructed, by a philosophical argument, which appeals really to reason for support. So, if we're discussing science, then I'd agree with Tooltime that you can't use the term to know with any confidence if you're lacking the evidence that can and should support your assertions. But as I said, the argument was largely a philosophical one, and at least the one that they were discussing, which was the origins of the universe. And I think that's an important point because atheists rely on the lack of physical evidence for the creation of the universe as positive evidence of God's non-existence, and therefore as a basis of rejecting the creation story. After all, if there's no God, then how could there be a creation, right? But on the other hand, um, this type of thinking, this argument, destroys their own position because they have no physical evidence for any of their theories as well. Most notably, the idea that the universe, the Earth, and everything that there is came into existence on its own. But if we use the same criteria as they employed in their argument against creation, then it would only seem fitting to state that they have no physical evidence for any of their theories. Therefore, they can't make a claim that there is no God with any confidence. After all, if there's no evidence um, that that the universe came into existence on its own, then how can there be any evidence that there is no God? It's the same evidence that's lacking for a pro-God argument that also is lacking for an anti-God argument. So as I stated, creationists and atheists are on equal footing in regards to evidence of how the universe came into being, but as a philosophical argument, I have a source for truth that gives me the knowledge of where all this came from. So I can state, from my position, I can state with a large degree of confidence that I know how the universe began. For the atheist, his only recourse is to fall back on his own ignorance and declare that because he doesn't have any evidence to his liking that God exists, that he therefore can declare with confidence that there is no God and that the universe is nothing more than the result of randomness acting on, acting on natural forces not yet in existence. I guess if that makes any sense. So, of course, that's a caricature, but you know. So the real issue for tool time shouldn't be that Ray used the term "no" with any degree of confidence, because he did so in the context of a philosophical debate. But for an illustration of this, let's take a look at Ray's question in the debate to Thunderfoot, where he asked Thunderfoot, "Why is it that you don't believe that God exists? You don't believe in God's existence?" And Thunderfoot replies, "Well, what is there that would sustain such a point?" You see, to Thunderfoot, all such philosophical questions must meet the same criteria as a scientific theory would sustain, as long as it is unsympathetic to their worldview. But when the subject is sympathetic to their worldview, then all such requirements are suddenly shoved underneath the rug. When Ray challenges Thunderfoot with the answer, the creation is the answer, then Thunderfoot retorts, "Well, there is no evidence for it." Yet he quickly asserts that his worldview is correct in spite of the lack of any evidence to support his worldview. And this quickly brings us back to the point that I made, that neither Ray Comfort nor Thunderfoot can give scientific evidence for their position. So they have to rely on anecdotal or secondary sources as supporting to their worldview. So the question then becomes, well, who's got anecdotal or secondary sources of information that can, support their theories regarding the origins of the universe? Well, the answer to that is the believer. But of course, to be fair, we have to recognize that the main argument for atheism is applying scientific criteria to a philosophical question. So depending on who is asking the question, the atheist will either, suspend that criteria if the question begs sympathy for atheism, or they will insist on application of that criteria if the question is unsympathetic to their worldview. Well, I hope that my first foray into a video response will add to the discussion at hand. Thank you for listening.